He was hired to write a legacy. Instead, he found the one sentence that destroyed an empire. The first time Jonathan Cale saw Sebastian Vosker cry, it wasn't because of guilt. It was because he realized, too late, that his empire did not belong to his children. It did not belong to his board. And after everything he had done to keep control, it did not even belong to his name. It all came down to one sentence, buried in a document no one had read in 31 years. By then, it was already too late. Adrian had not been invited into the Vosker family to tell the truth. He had been hired to make a lie sound beautiful. That was how Sebastian Vosker described the memoir project on the day they met. He said it with a faint smile, seated beneath a portrait of himself in the London headquarters of Vosker Global Media, a company so large it owned newspapers, streaming platforms, film studios, radio networks, magazines, and enough politicians to make people whisper and lower their voices. "I'm not interested in history," Sebastian had said, sliding a leather folder across the desk. "History is written by frightened people trying to survive the dead. I want legacy. Legacy is written by the living." Adrian remembered those words because they told him everything. Sebastian was 78, sharp as broken glass and still terrifying. People called him a visionary in public and a tyrant in private. He had built Vosker Global Media from a single scandal paper his father once ran from a cramped office into a machine that shaped elections, erased reputations, and turned family feuds into billion-dollar strategy. He also had 3 adult children who looked at him the way survivors look at the sea. Celia, the eldest, was the public face of the empire. Elegant, controlled, and so composed that even her smile looked negotiated. She ran the broadcast division and spoke like someone who had learned early that emotion was a weakness men exploited. Julian, the only son, ran digital strategy. Charismatic, impulsive, adored by shareholders and hated by anyone who had ever worked directly for him. He thought leadership was a performance, and he had the audience to prove it. And then there was Mira. Sebastian's youngest child had no official executive title, no board seat, and no interest in performing for cameras. She oversaw the Vosker Foundation, handled private archives, and stayed away from the family's wars as much as a Vosker could. In the press, she was described as the quiet daughter. Inside the company, people barely mentioned her at all. That was Adrian's first lesson about dynasties. The person everybody overlooks is usually the one carrying the heaviest silence. Adrian himself did not belong in rooms like that. He was known for writing intimate celebrity memoirs, political autobiographies, and redemption books for men who wanted the world to forgive them before they died. He knew how to make monsters sound misunderstood. That skill had paid his rent, his mother's hospital bills, and the debt left behind by his brother after an accident 3 years earlier. He hated that he was good at it. But talent did not care about morality. It only cared whether it could survive. So when Sebastian Vosker's office called with a number large enough to change Adrian's life, he said yes before his conscience had the chance to interrupt. The terms were strict. Adrian would move into Halcyon House, Sebastian's coastal estate, for 6 months. He would have direct access to the patriarch's private study, personal papers selected by the family office, and long daily interview sessions. Everything would be confidential. Everything would remain on site. No copies, no photos, no outside discussion. "You will see private matters," Sebastian had said. "You will hear ugly things. Families like mine do not become powerful by being kind. Your job is not to judge. Your job is to understand." Adrian had nodded. But understanding, he would learn, was far more dangerous than judgment. Halcyon House was less a home than a monument to control. The walls were lined with photographs of presidents, prime ministers, actors, royals, and anchors. Sebastian was in all of them, never smiling too widely, never looking secondary. Even in other people's triumphs, he had placed himself at the center. Adrian was given a room in the East Wing and escorted every morning to the study, where Sebastian dictated memories like verdicts. He spoke of struggle, instinct, sacrifice. He never spoke of cruelty. When his wife Eleanor came up, Sebastian called her the moral spine of the family. He said it with a strange tightness in his jaw. Eleanor had died 12 years earlier, and her absence was the only subject that seemed to unsteady him. She believed institutions outlive men, he once said, staring at the sea through the window. I believed men create institutions. We disagreed. Who was right? Adrian asked. Sebastian turned back slowly. I'm still here, aren't I? At first, the work followed the usual rhythm of power and vanity. Adrian listened, drafted, refined. He shaped Sebastian's childhood poverty into myth. He softened labor disputes into strategic necessity. He turned betrayals into lessons and fear into leadership. Every chapter was a polishing cloth over old blood. But the house itself kept pulling him away from the official story. He began to notice the fractures. Celia arrived for weekly meetings with legal teams and left with eyes colder than before. Julian drifted in and out, laughing too loudly, drinking too much, always asking where the memoir would land on the question of succession. Mira spent long hours in the archives below the West Wing, cataloging Eleanor's letters and foundation records no one else seemed to value. One night, Adrian passed the music room and heard voices. You promised me, Julian hissed. I promised nothing, Celia said. I said you weren't ready. I built the future of this company while you played queen of cable news. And I cleaned up every disaster you dressed up as innovation. There was a pause, then a low, exhausted voice Adrian had not expected. If either of you cared half as much about what Mother wanted as you care about winning, Mira said, this family might still be salvageable. Julian laughed bitterly. Mother is gone. No, Mira said. You just found it convenient to bury her. Adrian should have walked away. Instead, he stood in the shadowed hallway until footsteps approached, then slipped back to his room with his pulse pounding and an unfamiliar feeling pressing at him. Shame. A week later, Sebastian suffered a minor collapse during an interview session. He did not call it that, of course. One moment he was speaking about a hostile takeover in Singapore. The next, his hand was gripping the edge of the desk and his face had gone pale. The pen fell from Adrian's fingers. Staff rushed in. Doctors were called. Sebastian recovered enough by evening to bark orders and refuse hospitalization, but the event changed the atmosphere in the house. Death had entered the room, and suddenly everyone behaved like heirs. Lawyers came more often. Board members arrived without notice. Julian campaigned through charm. Celia consolidated allies through efficiency. Mira disappeared deeper into the archives, as if looking for something the others had forgotten to fear. Then Sebastian summoned Adrian after midnight. The old man was wrapped in a dark robe, seated by the fire, looking more ancient than Adrian had yet seen him. You know what people are waiting for? Sebastian asked. A final manuscript? A weakness. He gave a thin smile. They smell one now. My children, my board, the markets, the vultures in government. They all think age makes men sentimental. It only makes them observant. He gestured to a locked cabinet near the shelves. In the morning, my general counsel will bring estate papers. I want a chapter on continuity, bloodline, stewardship. I want the world to understand that Vosker Global cannot be chopped apart by impatience. Adrian hesitated. You want the memoir to signal the succession? I want it to terrify anyone who thinks I failed to prepare. The next day, the cabinet was opened. Folders were stacked across the desk. Trust documents, amendments, governance memos, letters of intent, old agreements so dense with legal language they looked designed to numb the human soul. Adrian was not a lawyer. He was only supposed to absorb enough to write convincingly about legacy. But writers are professional scavengers. They notice what doesn't fit. Among the polished recent binders was one much older than the rest. Thin, cream-colored, worn at the edges, dated 1995, Founding Family Continuity Charter. Adrian only touched it because the ribbon marker was sticking halfway out, as if someone had once stopped reading mid-thought and never returned. He opened it casually. Then he saw the sentence. At first, it seemed too small to matter. Buried deep in a section on extraordinary incapacity, custodial stewardship, and hereditary continuity, it stated that in the event the controlling family trust was to be transferred after the founder's death or permanent incapacitation, the consolidated voting structure would remain valid only if the transition had been ratified by the surviving spouse or, in her absence, by written testamentary instruction duly lodged within the private foundation archives and acknowledged by 2 independent trustees. Adrian read it again, and again. Then his stomach dropped. The current succession plan everyone was operating under had been built entirely on the assumption that Sebastian's later trust amendments gave him unilateral control to designate his successor among his children and keep the company's controlling shares consolidated under one line of authority. But if the 1995 charter still governed the continuity structure, then Eleanor Vosker's testamentary instruction mattered. And if no such instruction had been formally acknowledged in the required way, the entire consolidated control mechanism could be invalid. That would mean the family's voting fortress could fracture, board protections could fail, cross-holdings might unravel, external claimants could challenge decades of centralized authority. The empire had not been secured. It had been balanced on paperwork. Adrian felt a chill spread through him. He told himself there had to be an override in a later document, a superseding clause, a technical fix, something. But over the next 2 days, while pretending to draft chapters, he quietly checked every amendment he could legally access. None of them eliminated that requirement cleanly. Several seemed to assume it had already been satisfied. No one, it appeared, had gone back to verify. It was not just negligence, it was arrogance. The dynasty had become so certain of its own permanence that it stopped reading its own foundations. Adrian should have taken the discovery directly to Sebastian. He knew that. But before he could decide, Mira found him in the archive corridor. She was holding a box of Eleanor's letters, dust on her sleeves, grief somehow built into the way she carried herself. "You look like someone just told you the house is on fire," she said. Adrian tried to smile. "Occupational hazard." "You're a terrible liar." He said nothing. For a moment, they just stood there, between shelves of old paper and stale history. Then she asked quietly, "Did you find something?" There are moments that split a life into before and after. Not because of explosions, because of trust. Adrian did not know why he told her. Maybe because she was the only person in that family who spoke like truth still mattered. Maybe because he was tired of being paid to beautify rot. Maybe because her eyes did not look hungry the way the others did. He told her about the clause. He expected shock. What he saw instead was recognition. Mira closed her eyes. "Oh God," she whispered. "You knew?" "Not knew. Suspected." She swallowed. "My mother used to say my father built castles with doors he didn't believe anyone else could see. After she died, I spent years in these archives because I thought she left something behind. Not money, not leverage. A warning." She set the box down carefully, as though afraid of dropping the past. He cut her out of everything near the end. Publicly, they looked united. Privately, she gave a sad laugh. Privately, she believed he was turning the company into a weapon against his own family, against all of us. "Then why didn't you fight?" "You think I didn't?" Her voice broke for the first time. "He made us compete for scraps of approval our whole lives. Celia learned control. Julian learned performance. I learned silence. That's what surviving him looked like." Adrian looked at her, really looked, and saw not the quiet daughter the press ignored, but a woman who had spent years being erased in her own home. "What if the instruction exists?" he asked. Mira's eyes opened. "Then it's in the private foundation archives. And if my father never found it, there's a reason. That night, they searched together. Not recklessly, not dramatically, methodically. They worked from Eleanor's catalog numbers, trustee correspondence, sealed inventory codes. Midnight bled into 2, then 3. Adrian's hands shook each time footsteps passed overhead. Mira moved with a calm that came only from long practice hiding panic. At 3:17 a.m., she found the envelope. It was inside a mislabeled folder of philanthropic endowments, cream stationery, Eleanor's handwriting, sealed with the foundation crest. Mira did not open it immediately. She just stared, and Adrian saw tears rise in her eyes so suddenly it looked like pain. She knew, Mira whispered. She knew he'd never look here. When they finally broke the seal, the room seemed to contract around them. It was a letter, yes, but attached to it was a formal testamentary instruction witnessed by 2 independent trustees, both now dead. The language was precise. If, at the time of Sebastian's death or incapacity, any of their children had been installed or advanced through coercive inducement, suppression of fiduciary review, or breach of equal familial disclosure, then Eleanor's instruction would void unilateral hereditary control and transfer interim stewardship to an independent public interest governance committee until the board could vote on a lawful structure. There was more. A handwritten postscript, not legally essential, emotionally devastating. If you are reading this, then Sebastian finally mistook fear for loyalty. Do not let the children become monuments to his damage. Break the crown before it breaks them. Mira sat down. Adrian looked away, because some grief is too private to witness directly. She wrote this for us, Mira said through tears. She knew what he was doing to us. She knew. Adrian had written many scenes of loss for famous people who wanted to appear human. None of them felt like this. This was not elegant grief. It was the sound of a daughter realizing that love had been there all along, just hidden in the only place power forgot to search. "What do we do?" he asked. Mira laughed bitterly through tears. "If we reveal this, it destroys him." "And if you don't?" She looked at the pages in her trembling hands. "Then he destroys everyone else." They did not sleep. By dawn, the choice was no longer abstract. Sebastian's legal counsel had already scheduled a board summit for Friday. He intended to formalize emergency continuity provisions. Julian believed he was about to be named successor. Celia believed she could block him and secure control herself. Markets had begun speculating. Newsrooms were circling. Ministers were calling. The machine could feel instability coming. And beneath all of it lay Eleanor's instruction, like a blade under silk. Adrian wanted out. Truly. He had not signed up to become a weapon in a family war. But by then, he had read enough private correspondence to know what Vosker Global had done under Sebastian's unchecked power. Intimidation campaigns, deliberate disinformation, leverage over regulators, reputational destruction of whistleblowers, settlements wrapped in silence. The memoir had been a laundering operation, and Adrian had been the chosen cleaner. Mira stood by the archive window as morning light turned the dust gold. "I can't ask you to help me," she said. "You're asking anyway." She nodded. "Yes." Friday came like a funeral in expensive clothes. The board assembled in the London Tower. Major shareholders joined by secure link. Senior legal teams lined the walls. Sebastian arrived pale but upright, refusing assistance, wearing a charcoal suit and the expression of a king attending his own coronation. Adrian was there officially to observe tone and language for the memoir's final chapters. Unofficially, his pulse was so loud he could barely hear. Julian smirked at him on the way in. "Get your pen ready. History's happening." Celia said nothing, but there was tension in every line of her body. Mira took a seat near the back, carrying a slim portfolio. Sebastian opened the meeting with authority sharpened by illness. He spoke of continuity, duty, market stability. He praised his children in the language of measured evaluation, as though even fatherhood were a performance review. Then he turned to the core matter: the preservation of consolidated family voting control under a designated successor. Julian straightened. Celia's jaw tightened. Sebastian lifted the document. Before he could speak the name, Mira stood. It was such a simple act, but it changed the room. "I need to enter an objection into the record," she said. Sebastian stared at her as if a portrait had begun talking. "This is not the forum for theater," he said. "No," Mira replied, her voice steady. "It's the forum for governance, something this family forgot a long time ago." The room chilled. The general counsel rose immediately. "Ms. Vosker, if you have a procedural concern, submit it to—" "I have a testamentary instruction lodged within the Foundation archives and witnessed by 2 independent trustees," Mira said. "It directly governs the validity of this succession event under the 1995 Family Continuity Charter." Silence. Real silence. Not the polite kind. The kind that means power just heard its own name in a criminal sentence. Sebastian did not move. "That charter was superseded." "It wasn't," Mira said. The council tried to interject, but one of the independent directors held up a hand. "Let her continue." Mira's fingers trembled once against the portfolio, then stilled. She handed copies to the board secretary. Adrian watched faces change one by one as pages moved across the table. Confusion, resistance, recognition, fear. Julian frowned, then grabbed his copy. Celia read with a stillness so complete she looked carved from ice. Sebastian remained seated, but all color left his face. "This is a fabrication," he said. Mira's voice cracked then, just slightly, enough to reveal the daughter beneath the witness. "It's Mother's handwriting, Mother's instruction, Mother's attempt to protect us from this exact moment." Julian looked up sharply. "What?" Celia turned to Sebastian, and for the first time Adrian saw not ambition in her eyes, but something raw. "You knew there was a chance this existed," she said. Sebastian said nothing. That silence answered everything. Julian stood so suddenly his chair scraped hard across the floor. "You let us tear each other apart for a crown you weren't even sure you could legally pass on?" "It was my company," Sebastian snapped. "No," Mira said, louder now. "That's the lie. It was never just yours." The independent directors called an immediate recess. Outside counsel was summoned. Trading monitors lit up red as rumors began leaking before anyone had officially confirmed anything. Newsrooms owned by Vosker were suddenly covering Vosker. A dynasty built on controlling the story had lost control of its own. In the corridor outside the boardroom, the family detonated. Julian shoved the papers against Sebastian's chest. "You used me." Celia laughed once, a horrible sound with no joy in it. "You used all of us." "I made you relevant," Sebastian barked. "You made us miserable," Mira said. He turned on her then, and Adrian saw why the whole family had bent around this man for decades. "You," Sebastian said, voice low with fury. "You ungrateful, sentimental child. You think this is morality? This is sabotage. This is weakness dressed as virtue." Mira's eyes filled, but she did not retreat. "No," she said. "This is the first honest thing this family has done in years." Sebastian's hand trembled. Whether from age, rage, or fear, Adrian could not tell. Then the old man looked at Adrian and understood. It happened in 1 second. The memoir, the archives, the timing. "You," Sebastian whispered. Adrian felt every eye turn toward him. "I hired you," Sebastian said. "I let you into my home." Adrian's throat tightened, but he made himself answer. "You hired me to write your legacy. I found the truth instead." Sebastian stared at him with such naked hatred that for a moment Adrian thought he might strike him. But what broke the patriarch was not rage, it was irrelevance. Lawyers were no longer waiting for his instructions. Board members were speaking over him. Market analysts were issuing emergency notes. Regulators, old rivals, activist investors, and suppressed claimants would all come now, drawn by blood in the water. The fortress walls had not merely cracked, they had revealed they were decorative. By close of market, Vosker Global Media had lost billions in value. By nightfall, emergency governance measures suspended Sebastian's succession action. By morning, multiple entities had filed for review of the trust structure and voting control. The empire still existed, but the dynasty was over. The scandal consumed the world. Headlines called it the fine print coup, the clause that killed a king, the widow's last word. Adrian's name never appeared publicly. Mira made sure of that. Officially, the instruction was discovered during archival governance review. Unofficially, everyone in the upper circles knew there had been an outsider in the sanctum when the walls came down. The memoir was cancelled. Sebastian Vosker vanished from public view. Celia resigned from active succession proceedings and later testified before an internal inquiry, stunning the markets again by confirming years of coercive governance culture. Julian tried to stage a last-minute campaign to save his personal standing, but leaked correspondence showed he had known more than he claimed. His supporters scattered. He left the company within months. And Mira? Mira did not take the throne. That was the part no one expected. She refused. Instead, she backed the independent stewardship structure her mother had designed, forcing the company to separate editorial protections from family dominance and subject long-hidden internal conduct to review. Investors called her naive. Commentators called her noble. Some relatives called her a traitor. But Adrian, who had seen the letter in her shaking hands, knew the truth. She was not refusing power because she was weak. She was refusing it because she understood what that house had done to everyone who confused control with love. Weeks later, Adrian met her one last time at Halcyon House. The estate was being partially emptied. Portraits had come down. Staff moved quietly through rooms that no longer felt immortal. The sea outside looked the same, which seemed almost insulting. Mira led him to the archive room. "I wanted to give you this," she said. It was a copy of Eleanor's handwritten postscript, framed simply. "Break the crown before it breaks them." Adrian looked at it for a long moment. "Are you sure?" "My mother wrote it for her children," Mira said softly. "But I think she also wrote it for anyone who ever mistook proximity to power for safety." He smiled sadly. "That sounds like something I needed to hear." She studied him. "What will you write now?" He thought about the years he had spent beautifying men like Sebastian, about all the ghosts he had helped dress as legends, about the price of surviving by lending your craft to vanity. "The truth," he said. Mira gave a small smile. "That should terrify a lot of people." He left Halcyon House that evening with one suitcase, an unpaid moral debt slightly lighter than before, and the strange ache that comes when a chapter closes without becoming a love story, even though something tender was there. He never saw Sebastian again, but 6 months later, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a single page torn from an old draft of the memoir Adrian had once been writing. On it, in Sebastian's sharp handwriting, were 4 words. "You were never invisible." No apology, no signature, no confession. Just that. Adrian stared at the page for a long time, unsettled by how deeply it cut. Because it revealed the final truth about empires like Vosker. Sebastian had seen everyone. He had seen Celia's hunger to be respected, Julian's desperation to be chosen, Mira's quiet pain, Adrian's financial ruin and moral weakness. He saw them all, and he used what he saw. That was why the ending still hurt. A monster is easier to grieve when he is blind, harder when he understood exactly what he was doing. Adrian put the page away and began writing the story he had avoided his whole career. Not the version powerful people paid for, the version they feared. Not a memoir, a reckoning. And when the book finally came out, readers thought the most shocking twist was the hidden clause that toppled a global media dynasty. They were wrong. The most shocking twist was this: the empire did not fall because of one sentence. It fell because one woman, long dismissed as quiet, had been loved enough for her mother to leave behind the truth. And one man, hired to bury that truth beneath polished language, finally chose not to. That is how dynasties really end. Not always with bullets, not always with bankruptcy, not always with scandal. Sometimes they end with a daughter opening a letter. Sometimes they end with a writer putting down his pen. And sometimes, the most powerful family in the world collapses because, in the end, the only thing stronger than inheritance is the part of the human heart that refuses to stay owned. This is the end. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to this channel if you like this story.